Seabridge, Maine, late autumn. A cold wind whipped off the harbor, slicing through the last stubborn leaves clinging to the maple trees along Waterman's Wharf. The old, salt-bitten fishing town braced itself for winter, shutters rattling against faded paint, the smell of brine and engine oil thick in the air. Rachel Morgan's boots struck the dock with each heavy step, her shoulders tense beneath her weathered navy jacket. She hadn't set foot here in over a decade, but the ache of coming home was as familiar as the fog that rolled in from the bay. At the farthest slip, her mother's boat waited, Sea Whisper, or what was left of her. Once bright blue, now faded to a mournful gray, hull flecked with rust and barnacles. Rachel hesitated before stepping aboard, heart thudding with grief and unfinished business. This boat was all her mother had left her. It felt more like a burden than an inheritance, yet duty called louder than desire. Before we dive deeper into the story, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell so you never miss our next story. Thank you. The deck groaned as Rachel crossed to the tiny cabin. A mess of tangled ropes and empty lobster traps cluttered the space, the remnants of a life spent battling tides and loneliness. With a deep breath, she pushed open the door, expecting only silence and the stale scent of neglect. Instead, a sudden movement made her freeze. Something low and wild flashed across the bunk. Tufts of mottled fur, muscles bunched, eyes gleaming gold. A bobcat. It crouched, lips curling back in a silent snarl, one forepaw twisted unnaturally beneath its body. For a moment, Rachel couldn't breathe. The sight of the animal, wounded, alone, feral, sent a pulse of memory through her. Desert sand, a howling storm, and the service dog she'd lost during her last deployment. The pain of that loss pressed sharp and immediate against her ribs. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and this animal was no soldier. Instinct took over. Rachel lowered herself to a crouch, voice calm, movements careful, scanning for signs of shock or infection. The bobcat didn't bolt, didn't attack. Its eyes locked onto hers, steady and unafraid, as if daring her to do something. Rachel's first thought was to call animal control, but a sudden squall hammered the side of the boat, making the old hull shudder. The docks were empty. The harbor master had locked up hours ago. For now, it was just her and this wild creature, marooned together in the gathering dusk. She moved slowly, searching the galley for something. Rags, maybe, or the first aid kit her mother always kept under the sink. As she rifled through drawers, a sharp clang rang out from below deck, metallic and wrong, echoing up through the floorboards. Rachel stiffened, ears straining. A boat this neglected shouldn't have any company. Heart pounding, she grabbed the nearest heavy object, a rusted gaff hook, and edged toward the hatch. The bobcat let out a low, warning growl, but didn't move. Rachel listened, every nerve on fire. She heard nothing more, only the hush of waves slapping the hull, the creak of tired ropes. But then she noticed something that didn't fit, a trail of muddy footprints on the wooden steps, fresh and dripping, leading up from the darkness below. She knelt to touch them, still wet. Whoever had been here was gone, or hiding. Pulse racing, Rachel swept her flashlight over the cabin. That's when she saw the glint near the bulkhead, a small brass bullet casing lying just beyond the tangle of ropes. She picked it up, turning it over in her hand. It was old, but not corroded. A .45 round, military issue, like the kind her mother used to keep stashed for emergencies. But why would it be here now, after so many years? The wind picked up. howling against the glass, and the bobcat pressed itself against the cabin wall, breath coming in shallow pants. Rachel's mind spun. This boat was supposed to be abandoned. Her mother gone. Her secrets buried. Yet here was a wounded animal, muddy prints, a bullet casing, signs of life and violence and mystery all tangled together. As Rachel knelt, patching the bobcat's paw with trembling hands, her mind raced with questions. Was someone using the sea whisper for something illegal? Had her mother's past come back to haunt them both? The ache of grief sharpened into something colder, something almost like fear. Thunder rumbled in the distance and rain began to lash the harbor. Rachel worked quickly, fashioning a makeshift splint from a chopstick and gauze. She wrapped the paw, murmuring words she barely remembered from field medic training. The bobcat flinched, but didn't fight her. Outside, a car door slammed, far down the pier. Rachel's head snapped up, but the sound faded, leaving her alone once more. She set up a nest of blankets in the corner, coaxing the bobcat closer. It hesitated, then settled, eyes never leaving hers. The storm rattled the windows, thunder echoing off the water. Rachel locked the door, checked the radio, dead of course, and sat back against the wall, exhausted. In the silence, the weight of the bullet casing pressed heavy in her pocket. She thought of her mother's voice, always calm, always secretive. Don't let anyone on the boat if you don't trust them, Rachel. Some things are better left hidden. Outside, the sea whisper rocked gently in the dark. Two survivors adrift on a sea of secrets. Rachel stared into the gloom, realizing her homecoming was just the beginning, and something dangerous was already circling, drawn by memories, old grudges, and the scent of blood. Morning crept slowly over Seabridge, the storm's rage giving way to a sullen gray calm. Rachel Morgan barely slept, muscles tight from hours hunched in the cramped cabin, every sound amplified by the steady pulse of fear. The bobcat slept beside her, fitful and tense, its bandaged paw tucked under its chest. Outside, gulls wheeled low, their cries echoing across empty docks. The world felt on edge, as if the night had changed more than just the weather. Rachel's thoughts drifted back to the muddy footprints and the bullet casing, now tucked deep in her pocket. The evidence of intrusion gnawed at her, setting her on edge. She moved quietly through the boat, securing windows, checking latches, every action an echo of old Navy routines. Security checks and battle drills, rituals meant to keep danger at bay. Her intention had been simple: clean up the boat, pay respects to her mother's memory, and sell Sea Whisper before winter closed in. But the bobcat's arrival and those unmistakable signs of trespass transformed everything. There was no leaving now, not with unanswered questions and the silent, watchful presence of a wounded animal depending on her. She brewed coffee in the battered galley, steam rising in the cold air, and set about tending to the bobcat's paw. It tolerated her attention with wary resignation, eyes following her every move. She found herself talking softly, more out of habit than expectation, voice steady as she worked. The cat blinked slowly, as if weighing whether she was enemy or ally, pain or relief. Midway through her chores, Rachel opened the captain's locker, her mother's last private space aboard Sea Whisper. Inside, buried under nautical charts and worn gloves, she found a heavy leather-bound logbook. It was old, the cover frayed, the edges dark with oil and time. Rachel hesitated, thumb brushing the familiar script of her mother's initials. She had no desire to read secrets meant for another lifetime, but curiosity and the gnawing sense of threat overruled reluctance. Pages and pages of tides, coordinates, weather notes, all in her mother's meticulous hand. Then, near the back, a stark entry written in hurried script: Cargo 47. Never let it fall into Victor Kane's hands. Rachel froze, reading the line again and again. The name struck like a cold slap. Victor Kane, a disgraced former Navy officer, a man whose shadow loomed large over every tale her mother ever whispered about the dangers of the sea. Word around the Navy had painted Kane as ruthless, clever, and utterly untrustworthy. If he wanted something, there was always more at stake than met the eye. Beneath the warning, her mother had scrawled a set of GPS coordinates and a hastily drawn symbol, two waves crossing over a box. Rachel's mind whirred. Cargo 47. What could it be? Money? Smuggled goods? Something from her mother's secretive past? Doubt gnawed at her, but one thing was certain. Her mother's final days had been consumed by fear of Kane. Instinct pulled Rachel to the helm. She keyed the ancient GPS unit, entering the coordinates, curiosity twisting in her gut. The device beeped, flickered, and then, unexpectedly, a tiny red light began to pulse. A beacon, old and overlooked, suddenly alive. For a split second, Rachel wondered if she'd made a mistake. The hum of electricity in the air felt ominous, as if she'd just opened a door that couldn't be closed. Far away, across town and down the coast, that signal found its mark. In a darkened warehouse on the edge of the shipping yards, Victor Kane stood before a wall of monitors, his expression a study in hard calculation. When the beacon's coordinates flashed onto his screen, recognition flickered, a bitter smile cutting across his face. He remembered Rachel's mother well, remembered the sting of disgrace and the years spent plotting revenge. Now, fate had delivered him an unexpected gift. The daughter, walking straight into his unfinished war. Rachel, oblivious to the eyes now tracking her, returned to her mother's logbook, heart pounding. A sense of inevitability crept over her. Whatever Cargo 47 was, her mother had died to protect it. Rachel's military training flared inside her, urging caution, but another force, a stubborn loyalty, a refusal to walk away, burned brighter. She would see this through, for her mother's memory and for the bobcat lying wounded at her feet. The rest of the day unfolded in tense, purposeful silence. Rachel cleaned the boat, stashed supplies, and patched leaks. She kept an eye on the bobcat, who prowled the cabin restlessly, drawn by scents only it could understand. The animal's quiet strength became an anchor in the storm of Rachel's thoughts. As dusk crept in, the wind shifted, carrying a chill sharper than before. Rachel set extra locks on the doors, checked the radio again, still dead. She took one last look at the harbor, now draped in shadows, and felt the weight of her decision. There was no turning back. She was in this to the end, whatever secrets the sea whisper and her mother's legacy might yield. Below deck, the bullet casing glinted under her flashlight, a small, silent warning that the past was not done with her yet. The following morning, Rachel awoke to sunlight pouring in through the salt-streaked windows, a soft, deceptive calm settling over Seabridge Harbor. The storm had passed, leaving everything washed clean and brilliant, the sky wide and blue above the clustered boats. Rachel stretched stiff muscles and found the bobcat sprawled in a shaft of golden light, licking its injured paw, eyes half closed in wary peace. For a fleeting moment, she almost believed she was safe, as if the darkness and fear of the previous night had been nothing more than a bad dream. On deck, the breeze smelled of seaweed and coffee from the bait shop down the dock. Rachel took a deep breath, feeling the tension ease from her shoulders. She moved quietly through her morning chores, checking the bandage, setting out scraps of fish for her unexpected companion, and double-checking the locks she'd secured so meticulously the night before. The Sea Whisper seemed to breathe with her, creaking gently against the pier, the old hull momentarily at peace. Rachel's mind, though, was far from still. The logbook, the bullet casing, and the strange beacon she'd unwittingly activated gnawed at her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, a prickle at the back of her neck that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. But the day was too bright for shadows, and the Bobcat too alive, its presence a stubborn challenge to her anxiety. By noon, Rachel decided to take the boat out for a short run, both to keep the engine from seizing up and to test if anything else aboard was out of place. She guided the Sea Whisper through the narrow channel, the engine rumbling low while the Bobcat prowled the deck, tail twitching at the unfamiliar motion. For a while, everything felt almost normal, just Rachel, the sea, and the whisper of her mother's memory riding the wind. Midway through her trip, as she rounded the headland that guarded Seabridge, a sudden roar split the calm. A sleek, dark speedboat surged up alongside her, its hull slicing through the water with purpose. Rachel's heart slammed in her chest as she glanced over to see two men in black windbreakers, faces masked by sunglasses and the bill of their caps. The taller man raised a megaphone and barked something Rachel couldn't quite make out above the engine noise, but the words Cargo 47 were unmistakable. Rachel's pulse hammered. She spun the wheel, turning the Sea Whisper back toward port, but it was too late. The speedboat matched her, engines revving, keeping pace no matter how sharply she steered. Rachel's mind raced. She had no way to outrun them, and nowhere to hide in the open channel. The Bobcat crouched low, hackles raised, a wild growl rumbling in its throat. Desperate, Rachel gunned the engine and made for the marina, weaving between lobster buoys and fishing lines, using every scrap of knowledge her mother ever taught her about these waters. She darted into the slip, leapt to the dock, and ran up the weathered ramp, not stopping until she reached the row of old storage sheds her mother once used. Her heart pounded, breath coming in harsh bursts. The world seemed to tilt, every sound amplified. Smoke drifted on the wind. Rachel's gut twisted. She sprinted to the shed, only to find the padlock smashed and the door hanging open. Inside, papers smoldered in a battered metal barrel, the air thick with the acrid stink of burning documents. Someone had been here, searching for something her mother had hidden. Rachel plunged her hands into the ashes, fingers burning, searching for anything the fire hadn't claimed. She found a half-melted keychain, a scorched photo, and scraps of her mother's handwriting. Her eyes stung, not just from the smoke, but from the loss, raw and immediate all over again. She wanted to scream, but instead forced herself to focus, searching for meaning among the ruins. In the pile of cinders, a corner of an old photograph survived. Rachel brushed away the soot, heart lurching as she studied the faded image. Her mother, standing at the prow of Sea Whisper, arms slung around a tall man in a German naval uniform. Both were smiling, though the man's eyes were shadowed by the brim of his cap. Rachel stared, mind reeling. Her mother had never mentioned anyone like this, certainly not anyone tied to the tangled history of the sea or the wars that raged across it. A family secret, hidden in plain sight. The realization sent a shiver down her spine. What had her mother been involved in? What was the true nature of Cargo 47? And why was Victor Kane, her mother's old nemesis, willing to risk everything to possess it? The answers were ash and echoes now, scattered by hands she would never see. Rachel pocketed the photo, its meaning as murky as the waters beneath Sea Whisper's battered hull. The sun had slipped behind a cloud, and the chill returned, sharper than before. She hurried back to the boat, the bobcat waiting at the rail, gaze steady and searching. The calm was broken. The past had come for her, burning away safety and certainty, leaving only questions and the fierce, unyielding will to survive. Rachel didn't stop to mourn what was lost in the flames. Survival instinct, drilled into her during years in the Navy, propelled her back to Sea Whisper with rapid, measured steps. Her mind worked in swift calculation. The destroyed papers meant someone was closing in, covering their tracks, or perhaps sending her a warning. Either way, there would be no safety in the open, no time to linger on grief or questions. The photograph, now hidden in her jacket pocket, weighed more than any weapon. On the dock, the bobcat's golden eyes met hers, an unspoken understanding passing between them. This wild creature had survived on cunning and instinct. Now those same skills might be the difference between freedom and capture for them both. Rachel glanced down the wharf. No sign of the black speedboat, but she knew Kane's men would not give up so easily. Without another thought, she started the engine, casting off lines with practiced hands, and guided Sea Whisper out of the slip. The sky had clouded again, the sunlight fading as thick mist rolled off the marshes to the south. Rachel's mother had always said that the marshes were a maze, dangerous and unwelcoming, but also the perfect hiding place for those who knew the tides. She pushed the old boat hard, steering into the labyrinth of tangled reeds and muddy channels, keeping a low profile as she navigated the winding waterways. The bobcat stalked the deck, tail low, alert for any movement beyond the bulrushes. The marshes were alive with secret sounds, the slap of water against mud, the cry of herons startled into flight, and beneath it all, the faint drone of engines somewhere behind them. Rachel's heart hammered as she threaded through narrow passages, hands steady on the wheel. Each time the sound of Kane's engines grew louder. The bobcat growled, fur standing on end, as if it could sense the threat long before Rachel's eyes caught any glimpse of pursuit. Twice she doubled back, ducking into dead-end inlets thick with cattails, waiting motionless while the noise passed by. Her body trembled with adrenaline, but her mind remained laser-focused on escape. Rain began to fall again, soft at first, then in cold, relentless sheets that turned the marsh into a living mirror. Visibility shrank. Every curve in the water seemed to offer both refuge and danger. Rachel squinted through the downpour, her knuckles white on the throttle. Sea Whisper groaned under the strain, the engine coughing with each surge forward. At the edge of the marsh, the channels narrowed further, funneled by jagged rock and muddy embankments toward a low, slippery cliff overhanging the tide. Rachel hesitated, scanning the water. The bobcat pressed against her leg, steady and unafraid, its presence a quiet anchor. For a moment, she was transported to a memory, her service dog at her side in a distant land, eyes calm and trusting in the face of chaos. The echo of loss washed over her, sharp and deep, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. She glanced back. Through the sheets of rain, the shape of Kane's speedboat materialized, engines roaring, slicing through the water like a shark on the hunt. There was no way back, no way forward, but into the unknown. The marsh was flooding, water rising rapidly with the incoming tide, transforming every safe path into a trap. Trapped at the edge of the cliff, Rachel killed the engine. For a moment, there was only the pounding of her heart, the hiss of rain, and the bobcat's low growl. She measured her options. Stay, and Kane's men would overtake them within minutes. There would be no mercy, not with Cargo 47 and her mother's secrets at stake. But the drop below meant plunging into freezing water, risking injury, hypothermia, and the slim chance the tide might sweep them out to sea. The sound of engines grew louder, headlights cutting through the mist as Kane's men neared. The Bobcat pressed closer, not with fear, but with a kind of fierce determination that mirrored Rachel's own. She remembered her training, the countless hours spent rehearsing leaps into dark, frigid water, the necessity of movement and breath. There was no room left for doubt. Rachel gathered the Bobcat into her arms, feeling its tense muscles beneath her grip. Time slowed as she took one last look at the narrowing marsh, the enemy closing in, the cliff before her. She drew a deep breath, counted silently, and with every ounce of strength, she jumped, launching herself and the Bobcat into the churning water below. Cold slammed into her like a wall. The world narrowed to sound and motion, splash, roar, the weight of the Bobcat clinging to her as they plunged beneath the surface. Rachel fought her way up, gasping for air, clutching her precious cargo. Behind her, voices shouted, searchlights raked the water, but the marsh and the rising tide swallowed them whole. She kicked toward the shore, the Bobcat paddling fiercely at her side. The pain of cold and exhaustion burned through her, but she refused to let go. When they finally crawled up onto the muddy bank, every muscle shaking, Rachel looked back at the cliff. Kane's men stood silhouetted in the mist, powerless to follow where she had gone. In that moment, battered and breathless, Rachel knew she and the Bobcat had not escaped. They had chosen survival, no matter the odds. The story was no longer just about her mother's secrets. It was about the will to fight, to endure, and to protect those left in her care, even if they were wild and wounded. The chill of the marsh still clung to Rachel as she trudged up the muddy bank, sodden clothes plastered to her skin, breath coming in ragged bursts. Her arms shook with fatigue, but she cradled the Bobcat tightly, feeling its quick, frantic heartbeat against her chest. The animal's sides heaved as it struggled for air, but even in exhaustion, it never tried to bolt. The two of them had crossed some invisible line together, a pact of survival born from necessity and trust. The wild thicket at the marsh's edge offered a thin cover. Rachel huddled there, shivering, while distant searchlights swept the water behind her. For what felt like hours, she pressed herself low, heart hammering as Kane's men combed the shoreline, voices distorted by wind and distance. Gradually, the search faded, engines sputtered off, and only the cries of gulls and the slap of rain remained. Rachel forced herself onward, her feet numb as she made her way along a narrow, half-paved road that curved away from the marsh toward the safety of town. The Bobcat limped at her side, refusing to be carried any farther. Together, battered and soaked, they moved through the empty streets of Seabridge, the pre-dawn quiet broken only by the distant hum of traffic on the highway. The first sign of warmth and life came in the form of a neon-lit roadside cafe. Its flickering, open 24 hours sign cut through the gloom like a promise. Rachel hesitated outside, checking her reflection in the darkened window, disheveled, pale, eyes ringed with fatigue and fear. She slipped inside anyway, the bell above the door announcing her entrance. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of coffee, frying bacon, and wet wool. The Bobcat slunk beneath her booth, drawing only a few curious looks from the lone waitress and a pair of truckers hunched over their mugs. Rachel settled in, every muscle aching, and ordered the first hot meal she'd tasted since coming home. As she ate, she scanned the room, wary of strangers. One man caught her attention, a weathered face, hair streaked with gray, a battered notebook open beside his coffee. He watched her with a quiet intensity, eyes kind but sharp, as if searching for answers of his own. When their gazes met, Rachel recognized something familiar, a hint of the sea, a posture shaped by years on the water. He introduced himself as Ethan Cross, a maritime historian who had once worked with her mother. Their conversation began awkwardly, both circumspect, but as Rachel mentioned the boat and her mother's warnings, Ethan's expression shifted from curiosity to grave concern. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. Instead of small talk, he spoke of history, dark, tangled, and alive beneath the surface. Ethan explained that Cargo 47 was more than a cryptic entry in a sailor's logbook. Decades ago, in the dying days of World War II, a German U-boat had slipped through the Atlantic, carrying looted art and treasures stolen from occupied Europe. When it vanished off the Maine coast, rumor spread that its cargo, priceless paintings, gold, and documents, had been hidden by those seeking to profit from chaos. Over the years, treasure hunters, criminals, and secret keepers had searched for the lost compartment. None had found it, but Victor Kane had turned his obsession into a weapon, using rumors and threats to launder money, buy influence, and bury anyone who stood in his way. Rachel listened, the weight of her mother's secrets growing heavier with each word. The tangled family history was now interwoven with a much larger web, war, greed, and vengeance spanning generations. The truth, she realized, was a living thing, clawing its way out of the shadows whether she wanted it or not. Before they could speak further, a sudden movement in the cafe caught Rachel's attention. A woman slipped into the booth behind her, pressing something into Rachel's hand beneath the table, a torn, yellowed page, faintly scented with lavender and brine. On it, her mother's handwriting trembled across the lines. "If you're reading this, Kane has found me. Trust only what I have hidden. The truth is more dangerous than the lies. M." Rachel's hand shook as she read the note. The bobcat pressed against her leg, alert and bristling. The stranger had vanished into the morning fog as quickly as she had appeared. Questions buzzed in Rachel's mind. How had her mother planned all of this? Who else was involved? Was anyone left to trust? The answers would not come easy. But as Rachel gathered the torn diary page and locked eyes with Ethan, she felt a new resolve harden inside her. She would not run. Not this time. Whatever secrets Cargo 47 contained, she would reach it first. Not just to fulfill her mother's last wish, but to stop Kane and whatever darkness he planned to unleash. Rachel stood, ready to face the tide of the past, the bobcat and Ethan at her side. The hunt was no longer just about survival. It was about truth, legacy, and the fight for something bigger than herself. The sun had barely risen above the horizon as Rachel, Ethan, and the bobcat left the safety of the cafe behind. Their course was clear now, offshore into the open Atlantic, toward the hidden coordinates Rachel's mother had left behind. The risks were immense, but retreat was no longer an option. Rachel felt a strange clarity settling over her. Fear sharpened into purpose, sorrow hardened into resolve. They gathered supplies in haste. Extra fuel, old dive gear from a bait shop run by one of Ethan's friends, canned food, and a battered marine radio Ethan insisted on testing twice before they left. The bobcat watched all this with unblinking eyes, never straying far from Rachel's side, as if sensing the magnitude of what lay ahead. By mid-morning, Sea Whisper plowed out of Seabridge Harbor, her patched hull straining against the current. The marshes and winding inlets gave way to the vast, restless ocean, gray and inscrutable beneath a sky thick with gathering clouds. Rachel manned the helm, guiding them over rolling swells. Ethan pored over her mother's logbook and the torn diary page, his fingers tracing cryptic notations and faded maps. There was little comfort in the knowledge that they were not alone. Every so often, Ethan caught faint blips on the old radar, another vessel shadowing them in the distance, closing the gap with predatory patience. The coordinates led them farther out than Rachel had ever gone on her mother's boat, to a lonely patch of sea where the wind cut sharp and cold. Here the waves were steeper, the color of slate, as if the ocean itself was keeping secrets. Ethan double-checked the sonar, searching for the signature of a wreck beneath the surface, a jagged silhouette that matched the outline of a WWII U-boat buried deep in silt and shadow. They dropped anchor. Rachel changed into her dry suit, every movement measured, recalling years of Navy training she'd hoped never to use again. The Bobcat prowled the deck, ears laid flat against the moan of the wind. Ethan helped rig the air tanks and checked the lines one final time. They spoke little, urgency hanging between them like a fog. Rachel descended first, slipping beneath the waves into a cold, green world where sunlight faded and the pressure squeezed tight. Visibility was poor. Clouds of silt and twisted debris made every movement feel perilous. The outline of the sunken U-boat emerged, massive and silent on the ocean floor, its hull scarred by time and storms. Her mother's notations had been precise. A hidden compartment, marked by an engraved star, somewhere near the conning tower. Above, the Bobcat paced anxiously, tail lashing. Ethan's gaze darted between the water and the horizon, watching as a sleek shadow on the radar drew closer, Kane's boat, relentless, tracking them by sonar. Rachel moved swiftly, heart pounding, as she searched the hull for the secret hatch. Suddenly, a sharp tug on her air hose. Rachel spun, disoriented, feeling it snag on a jagged piece of metal. Panic threatened, but she forced her mind into calm. Breathe, assess, act. She reached for her knife, trying to free the hose, but the silt blinded her, every second stretching into agony. Up above, the Bobcat scratched and howled at the deck, frantic, sensing Rachel's distress even through the layers of ocean and steel. Ethan, catching sight of the Bobcat's panic, leaned over the rail. He heard Rachel's muffled distress through the radio, grabbed the backup line, and dove in after her, fighting against the drag of his suit and the weight of dread in his chest. He reached Rachel just as her hands began to shake from oxygen deprivation, found the tangle, and freed the line with a desperate jerk. Together, they surfaced, gasping, the cold air burning in their lungs. Rachel scrambled back onto Sea Whisper, clutching the Bobcat, whose claws dug into her sleeve but offered comfort nonetheless. Ethan followed, chest heaving, and for a moment, the three of them huddled in the lee of the cabin, survivors in a world that seemed bent on swallowing them whole. But there was no time to rest. Kane's voice boomed over the water, carried by a megaphone, the menace unmistakable. "Take them!" Rachel's blood iced. She saw figures moving on the deck of Kane's boat, weapons glinting. There was only one chance. Get back to the wreck, find the compartment, and secure the evidence before Kane's men could board. With grim determination, Rachel checked her gear, exchanged a brief nod with Ethan, and prepared to dive again. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the first cold drops of a new storm splattering the deck. The ocean churned, angry and impatient. Rachel steadied herself on the rail, the Bobcat pressing against her leg in a rare show of affection. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but she refused. Her mother's secrets, Cain's greed, the weight of history itself, all of it weighted in the darkness below. Rachel dove once more, her heart pounding not just for herself, but for everyone who had ever risked everything for truth. The water felt colder on Rachel's second descent, the weight of the ocean pressing tighter as the storm's first rumblings rolled overhead. She moved through the gloom, her flashlight beams slicing through curtains of silt as she returned to the silent bulk of the U-boat lying half-buried on the ocean floor. Above, sea whisper pitched with the growing waves, and even at this depth, she could sense the coming chaos. Rachel's lungs burned with every breath from the air tank, her heart thudding as she scanned the battered hull. Her mother's map, Ethan's hurried instructions, the Bobcat's frantic mules on deck, all echoed in her mind as she searched for the telltale engraving, a small star, almost erased by time and corrosion, just above a seam in the steel. She found it, running gloved fingers over the rough metal. With trembling hands, Rachel pried at the hatch. It resisted at first, as if the secrets inside clung to the wreck like barnacles. She gritted her teeth, remembering every lesson in perseverance and patience the Navy had taught her. At last, with a metallic groan, the panel slid open. The compartment was small, dry after decades in the silt, and inside lay a battered wooden crate bound with wire and a lock as old as the war itself. A flash of movement caught her eye. A slender shadow slipped through a crack in the hull above. Then a streak of mottled fur vanished into the gloom. The Bobcat, braver than most people Rachel had ever known, had squeezed through a narrow gap, its paws finding purchase where no diver could fit. It pawed at something behind a loose panel, and as Rachel watched, it dragged out an old brass key, letting it fall to the floor with a sharp, ringing clang. Rachel's pulse leapt. She seized the key, hands shaking as she fitted into the crate's ancient lock. It turned with a stubborn grind, finally snapping open. She braced herself for disappointment, for the possibility that her mother's life, and perhaps her own, had been risked for nothing. But as she lifted the lid, hope flared bright and fierce. Inside, carefully wrapped in oilcloth and linen, were treasures unimaginable. Paintings marked with the seals of lost European families, a velvet pouch heavy with gold coins, and a thick packet of yellowed documents stamped with the insignia of both Allied and Axis powers. There, in her gloved hands, was the truth. Art stolen in war, fortunes lost to history, and something more. At the bottom of the crate, bound with a red ribbon, lay a folder marked in her mother's handwriting. Cain. Evidence. Rachel flipped through the pages, heart pounding as she scanned lists of names, dates, and cold, precise details of Cain's operations. Illegal arms shipments, bribes, even accounts of murders committed to protect his smuggling empire. Here, in the rusted belly of the Atlantic, was everything needed to bring him down. A sudden explosion of static ripped through her radio. Cain's voice, harsh and triumphant, echoed through her earpiece. "I know you're down there, Morgan. You can't hide the past. Give me the crate, and maybe I'll let you live." Rachel ignored him, shoving the evidence into her waterproof bag and signaling to Ethan above. The sea had turned wild in her absence. She could feel the current shifting, the swell growing. Shadows flickered overhead, Cain's men lowering a small submersible, angling to intercept her before she could return to the surface. She moved fast, adrenaline surging, years of military discipline taking over. She tossed the bag up toward Ethan's waiting hands as she broke the surface, waves smashing over her head. Ethan pulled her aboard with a desperate grip, while the Bobcat, miraculously, leaped up onto the deck beside them, water streaming from its fur. But Kane was closing in. His boat loomed, engines roaring, men shouting as they prepared to board. Rachel's mind raced. She needed time, a distraction, anything to keep the evidence from falling into enemy hands. Her eyes landed on the Sea Whisper's old sonar array, a relic she had nearly forgotten in the chaos of escape. An idea sparked. Using her Navy training, she reprogrammed the array to send out a scatter of false signals, painting the sea with echoes and confusing Kane's instruments. The ruse worked. For precious moments, Kane's submersible circled aimlessly, chasing phantom targets, while Rachel and Ethan powered Sea Whisper away from the wreck. Thunder cracked overhead, lightning lashing the water as the storm exploded in earnest. Sheets of rain hammered the deck, the sky and sea churning together in violent fury. As Sea Whisper raced for the safety of deeper water, Rachel glanced back through the sheets of rain and spray. Kane's men struggled to keep control of their craft, blinded by the storm and their own greed. The Bobcat, unbothered by the chaos, pressed against Rachel's legs, as if offering its own brand of wild courage. They escaped under cover of the tempest, leaving the past's darkness swirling behind them, proof in hand, hope in their hearts, and the roar of the storm urging them on toward a new fate. Sea Whisper groaned and shuddered as the storm battered her from all sides, rain pelting the deck in blinding sheets. Rachel gripped the helm, muscles screaming from the fight with the waves, eyes stinging from salt and exhaustion. The Bobcat huddled under the dashboard, eyes wide, every muscle tensed as thunder cracked overhead and lightning split the sky. Ethan held fast to the radio, voice low and steady as he relayed their coordinates to the authorities. This time, they had real proof, and the world needed to see it. They plowed through the tempest, battered by wind and fear, adrenaline the only thing keeping Rachel upright. In those wild moments, the Sea Whisper became a living thing, creaking and straining as if the boat itself understood the urgency of their mission. The crate of stolen treasures and damning evidence was lashed to the floor by Ethan's quick hands. Each turn of rope a promise that what they'd risked would not be in vain. Behind them, the faint outline of Kane's boat vanished in the chaos. His men blinded, his electronics scrambled by Rachel's false sonar echoes and the violence of the storm. She didn't let herself relax, not even as the radio crackled with a new voice. The Coast Guard, responding to Ethan's distress call, their cutter racing through the gale to intercept them before they were lost to the ocean's fury. When the worst of the squall passed, the world emerged changed. Gray light filtered through the clouds. The ocean, while still churning, had lost some of its menace. Sea Whisper, though battered and leaking, kept afloat, stubborn and determined as the woman who steered her. Rachel looked back, shivering as relief and disbelief mingled inside her. They had survived the night, and with them, the secrets her mother had died to protect. The Coast Guard met them near the mouth of the river. Armed agents in rain-soaked uniforms hauled the crate aboard, cataloging its contents while Rachel handed over the envelope of evidence marked with Kane's name. The Bobcat, now wrapped in Ethan's spare jacket, watched the scene with a strange calm, as if it sensed that the fight was over, at least for now. Rachel answered questions with quiet precision, her words backed by the weight of the documents and the battered treasures laid out before the stunned authorities. Names, dates, transaction logs, and lists of those Kane had bribed or destroyed. All there, indisputable. The lead agent's face grew pale as he read, understanding dawning with every page. The law moved fast. Kane's pursuit ended not with violence, but with a pair of handcuffs and the flashing lights of waiting FBI vehicles at the marina, the man's rage stifled by the finality of truth. But victory came with a price. During their escape, Sea Whisper had struck a reef in the wild surf, hull splintered along the starboard side. Rachel spent hours helping the Coast Guard crew pump water from the bilge and patch leaks, each crack in the wood a reminder of how close she'd come to losing everything her mother left behind. The old boat that had carried generations was wounded, perhaps beyond repair. Rachel swallowed her grief, turning her focus to what could still be saved. The bobcat's future weighed heavily on her. The animal, once wild and fierce, now seemed caught between two worlds. Its injured paw had healed enough for walking, but its spirit bore scars that could not be seen. Rachel stood with the animal on the dock, stroking its fur, torn between setting it free and keeping it close. In the end, she chose what was best for the bobcat. Not for herself. She contacted a local wildlife sanctuary, run by a friend of her mother's, who specialized in rehabilitating animals too damaged for the wild. The sanctuary staff came with gentle hands and quiet words, promising the bobcat a life of safety, freedom, and, in time, perhaps a return to the forests and marshes where it belonged. Rachel watched the animal go with a bittersweet sense of loss, whispering thanks for its courage, its loyalty, and for the wildness they'd shared. As Rachel gathered the last of her belongings from Sea Whisper, the lead FBI agent approached with a sealed envelope. He explained it had come through official channels, a final gift, found in her mother's old post office box, and only to be opened if the truth about Cargo 47 ever came to light. Rachel waited until she was alone on the battered deck, the wind soft and the water calm, before she tore open the envelope. Inside was a letter, written in her mother's careful hand. Apologies spilled across the page, mixed with memories and confessions. A life spent hiding from shadows, choices made for love and protection, regrets carried to the end. Her mother wrote not only of Cain, but of the burden of secrets, the ache of watching Rachel grow up without ever knowing the full truth. Tears blurred Rachel's vision as she read. For the first time since returning to Seabridge, she allowed herself to mourn, not just the losses, but the lies, the love, and the hope that had survived despite everything. The letter closed with a plea for forgiveness and a hope that Rachel would find her own way to let go of the past. Rachel stood on Sea Whisper, battered but unbroken, letting the wind carry away the last echoes of fear. She had fought for truth, survived the storm, and honored her mother's memory. And now, with the wild bobcat gone to a new home and Cain's darkness finally brought to light, she was free to begin again. After the chaos subsided and the headlines faded, Rachel Morgan found herself alone with the battered remnants of Sea Whisper, docked at the very place where her journey had begun. The harbor had returned to its old rhythm, fishing boats rolling out before dawn, gulls calling over piles of fresh catch, autumn's chill creeping into every crack of the dock. Yet for Rachel, the world felt irrevocably changed. Sea Whisper bore the scars of her ordeal, planks warped and patched, decks pitted from salt and impact, the old name still barely visible beneath layers of paint. Some days, Rachel wondered if the boat had survived out of sheer stubbornness, a vessel refusing to go quietly, just like her mother. Others suggested she scrap it and move on. But Rachel saw something else, not just a relic, but a monument to truth, loyalty, and survival. With settlement money from the recovered art and a small grant from the local historical society, Rachel set out to restore Sea Whisper. She worked through the days and nights, hands calloused from sanding and caulking, learning the rhythms of repair as she'd once learned those of the sea. Ethan helped whenever his research allowed, guiding her through the preservation of the ship's original features. In time, word spread through Seabridge that the old boat wasn't destined for the scrapyard after all, but would be reborn as a small maritime museum. One that would tell the story not just of war and loss, but of courage, justice, and the lives that intersected in a quiet Maine harbor. Visitors came, drawn by curiosity and the local news coverage of the Cargo 47 scandal. They wandered the carefully restored decks, gazing at photographs of her mother, young and vibrant at the helm, arm around friends and family, always facing into the wind. Rachel arranged the salvaged logbooks and maps beneath glass, alongside a small plaque honoring the Bobcat, whose wild spirit had guided her through danger. The crate, emptied of its treasures but still bearing the marks of its long journey, stood as a reminder of secrets both lost and found. For Rachel, the museum became more than a tribute to the past. It was a place of healing. Each tour she led, each story she told, was a step toward forgiveness, not only of her mother, but of herself. She learned to speak of the choices made in fear and love, the burdens that parents carry, and the pain of not knowing the whole truth. The legacy her mother left was no longer heavy with grief and secrecy, but instead filled with the light of shared memory and the power of honesty. People from the community left their own artifacts, stories, and memories, and soon Sea Whisper was more than just a museum. It became a living archive, a testament to the quiet heroism found in small towns and on windswept coasts. Local schoolchildren came to listen, wide-eyed, to the tale of a hidden U-boat, a Navy daughter, and the wild Bobcat that outsmarted a criminal kingpin. Elderly veterans wept quietly in corners, seeing themselves reflected in the old black-and-white photos of ships and storms. Even tourists passing through on summer holidays lingered longer than they planned, drawn by the universal thread of struggle and hope. Through it all, Rachel grew into her new role. She had always been a fighter, shaped by the Navy and the harsh lessons of loss. But now she became a keeper of stories, a protector of truth, learning that legacy is never just about what is left behind. It's about what is remembered, what is shared, and the lessons carried forward. The Bobcat's absence lingered in the corners of her life, a wild shape in the mist, a flash of gold in her dreams. Sometimes, on quiet nights, Rachel thought she heard its call in the marshlands beyond the town, a reminder that some spirits cannot be tamed or owned. She often visited the sanctuary, watching as the animal grew stronger, wilder, always turning away from the fences toward the open world. Rachel understood. Freedom was the greatest gift she could offer, just as her mother had, in the end, set her free from the weight of secrecy. Forgiving her mother took time, and forgiveness for herself came even slower. Yet each day brought new understanding, that protecting the truth, even when painful, was an act of love. The restoration of Sea Whisper, the creation of the museum, the quiet rituals of community, they were all part of Rachel's own healing, a way to honor the past while building a future. As the seasons changed and tourists dwindled, Rachel often stood at the bow of Sea Whisper at dusk, watching the tides turn beneath her feet. She felt the presence of her mother, the Bobcat, and all those whose lives had brushed against hers in that stormy autumn. In their memory and in her own hard-won peace, she found the lesson her mother had hoped she'd learn. Legacy isn't the weight of secrets or the value of treasure. It's the courage to tell the truth, to protect what matters, and to share the stories that make us whole. The first frost of winter settled over Seabridge, dusting the old wharves and rooftops with silver as the last leaves fell. Inside Sea Whisper, now transformed from battered survivor to a living testament, Rachel moved quietly among displays that told the hidden story of Cargo 47, a story she had come to own not just as a legacy, but as a responsibility. The museum had become a fixture in the town, woven into its fabric. School groups came bundled against the cold, their laughter echoing along the decks as Rachel shared tales of lost treasure, wartime secrets, and the wild bobcat whose bravery still fascinated young and old alike. Local fishermen and shopkeepers drifted in after work, finding comfort in the warmth and quiet, sometimes leaving behind their own mementos: a weathered compass, a faded photograph, a handwritten logbook from another era. Each artifact layered new meaning onto the old hull, as if the ship itself was gathering the town's stories and holding them safe. On weekends, Rachel held history nights, inviting anyone who wished to speak. There were stories of storms survived, friendships forged at sea, and loved ones lost but not forgotten. In sharing their memories, the people of Seabridge found common ground, not in the specifics of Rachel's battle with Cain, but in the shared knowledge that the past, however painful or complicated, shapes the present in ways both visible and invisible. The crate that had once hidden stolen treasures now sat empty but honored, its battered wood polished smooth by countless hands. Its emptiness became a symbol. The real value lay not in the gold or art it once carried, but in the truths it revealed and the justice it brought. Even the envelope from Rachel's mother, now displayed with her final letter, offered a poignant reminder of the human cost of secrets and the difficult, necessary work of forgiveness. Rachel's own journey became part of the museum's narrative, woven into the exhibits with candor and humility. She wrote her mother's story alongside her own, acknowledging mistakes, honoring sacrifice, and celebrating the moments of grace that emerged from hardship. The Navy trained her to fight and endure, but it was the love of her mother, the wild courage of the Bobcat, and the stubborn hope of a small town that taught her the greater lesson. True legacy is built from the choices we make when no one is watching, the loyalties we honor even when it costs us, and the stories we dare to share. In the months that followed, Rachel noticed how the museum drew people together. Families came to trace the town's history. Old friends met for coffee on the deck, telling tales both tall and true. Children left hand-drawn pictures of ships and wildcats for the collection. The line between past and present blurred, binding people together in the kind of community Rachel had once thought lost to her. The Bobcat, meanwhile, flourished at the sanctuary, returning to the wildness that had always been its home, but never truly leaving Rachel's heart. Sometimes Rachel would step outside at dusk, looking over the harbor, watching the mists rise and swirl above the water. The pain of loss and betrayal was still there, but it no longer defined her. Instead, she felt a quiet gratitude for the truth that had come to light, for the peace that came from forgiveness, and for the chance to honor both her mother's memory and her own hard-won courage. She left a small note by the museum's entrance, a message for all who came searching for answers, for healing, or simply for a place to belong. People, history, and the wild are bound together by loyalty and truth. The stories we keep, the secrets we reveal, and the love we protect, they shape who we are and what we leave behind. If you held a piece of history, would you keep it to yourself or share it with the world? Tell your story. Leave your mark. As winter deepened and the harbor settled into stillness, Rachel stood at the bow of Sea Whisper one last time, letting the cold wind fill her lungs, eyes fixed on the horizon. She understood now that the greatest inheritance was not a boat or a treasure, but the courage to face the past, the grace to forgive, and the willingness to carry truth forward, no matter the cost. Sea Whisper would remain, a living vessel of memory and hope. And as visitors traced their hands over its rails, left stories in its logbook, or simply paused to remember, Rachel knew the story was no longer just hers. It belonged to everyone willing to listen, to learn, and to carry it onward.